everybody? Welcome back to the Not a Pod. Got your co-host and David here. Super excited to get into it. We're going to talk about a few stories that came across our desk, and then after that, get into like our main theme. But David, let's kick off with Meta. It seems like you know a lot more. What's going on in the Meta space?
Meta made some changes, hopefully for the good for most brands, but what they basically want is to ensure that any advertiser has a legal entity, is like a real business. Prior to that, it was kind of like, hey, I just need to have a credit card and I can push whatever ads I wanted to without any of like the liability, you could say, of advertising on Meta. I mean, obviously, Meta is a massive advertiser, has a lot of be accountable for, and so finally, this might clear the path of just some of like the I don't want to say raunchy, but just some of the bad advertising actors on the platform. So hopefully, this is a plus for our brands and our customers, and hopefully for you guys, the listeners.
Yeah, that's a good transition into our next story, TikTok Smart Plus. If anybody, if you're listening to this, you don't know what that is. It's pretty much TikTok's version of like let the algorithm do everything. But what's different about it now is more users are able to actually take control. Is that kind of what I'm understanding, David?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you have like the automated ads, the AI influence ads, and Meta and in Google, and so these like AKA smart campaigns are now allowing on TikTok, allowing the advertiser to have a little bit more control, which means more control over your margin, your SKU by SKU basis. You have a little bit more control over instead of just letting it do whatever it does. You know what your margins are, you know what your advertising needs to be at. And so now what that'll be is this, it'll allow you to take more control over that. So applause again, another good story from TikTok. Now that just also means you need to take control. So don't just set it and forget it. You do need to make sure now that they give you this control that you do take control. So make sure you have good buyers on your hand. But yeah, another positive story from today.
Yeah, I I kind of like heard this equation. It was sort of like, hey, let TikTok optimize your placements and your like creative delivery, but you keep like manual control over budgets and then like audience targeting. It's kind of what I've heard and understood. So if you're listening, kind of take that approach to it. Um, okay, so our next story is kind of older, and maybe we can kind of skip over it a little bit, but in our last pod, I did mention Prime Day coming up on the 23rd, and it's going to be through the 26th. David, do you want to take like uh, another side to that really quick? Just explain it.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of brushed over this back in February since we didn't really start the pod, but Amazon officially took over Walmart and overall revenue. So it's the number one retailer in the nation. Um, and so as we get to Prime Day too, we need to kind of rethink like what is the potential outcome now that they've always wielded like a lot of power, but now what does this mean for us for Prime Day? We've kind of had ebbs and flows of what Prime Day is like. Oh, Prime Day is dying. Consumers are just whatever about Prime Day. It's also during a time where we need Prime Day. Sales are usually pretty low, so this incentivizes consumers overall. And then also like we're announced this on like Monday or Tuesday, I want to say, and it's the 23rd. So we literally have 20 days to make like of announcements. And this is a pro and con. Like, all right, now we only have 20 days. It's here. If you're a seller, and most of you listeners are, you kind of were aware of this since March when they announced deadlines of when things need to happen. So now we can kind of reverse engineer everything that's going to happen. But our Amazon's competitors also know this as well. So Walmart and Targets, even your Best Buys and some of the more niche retailers are going to be releasing their own version of this summer sale. And so how do you need to adjust to that? and why it's so important to be in multiple locations now that they're going to spread this thin. What we learned from Memorial Day weekend is that more people are going to be engaged, but spending less. Now, where are they going to be engaged? Are they going to be engaged on Amazon, in-store, Walmart, right? Where is your audience? And are you missing out on any of these opportunities not being in some of these, not being omni-channel focused, I should say. So a interesting take. Again, this is not much of a breaking news story, but just something to think about as we get into Prime Day prep, advertising prep, where you're going to be pushing your ad dollars on what channels, and make sure that you run some of these tests.
Okay. Thank you for that. Cool. Let's dive into our main theme today. Like one thing we talk about all the time with brands is like the diversification. I think everybody wants lower acquisition costs. Everybody wants more content. Everybody wants like additional revenue channels. And I think what we've seen is that creator partnerships have become one of the most like common answers. And the problem with that, I want to say, is like most brands either pay too much or like just track it poorly or don't actually understand the economics behind it. So David, can we just dig into that for a second? Like when someone says we need an influencer strategy, what's the first thing you look at before spending a dollar?
Um, my first thing before spending a dollar is I don't know if somebody tells me like bluntly, and unfortunately this happens all the time, we need an influencer strategy. And I say, do you know what an influencer strategy really is? Right? Because most people are asking that right now. And even like, it's a trick question because it's so diverse, right? Like, we need to sell on Amazon. Okay, well, that doesn't mean anything. Like, of course, we need an influencer strategy. So we need to first set the guidelines of like, what is an influencer strategy to you and what is it to your competitors, and really just learn, right? Sometimes copying is great. Like whatever your competitors are doing, let's copy that. Sometimes being unique is also great. You get big wins, but comes at its own risk. And so we just need to understand like, okay, we need an influencer strategy. It means just not just marketing, not just copying, but let's understand it as a whole. And every brand is a little bit different. We hear huge stories, Grooms, obviously, and massive breakout brands, especially here in Utah, of what they're doing. It's like, oh, it was influencers that drove them. It was their social presence that drove them. Well, what does that mean for you, right? Let's take what works for them, run that over your marketing operations, your overall operations, and pick out, oh, this is what will amplify our own talents through this influencer program, and then dive deeper into that. Before I spend a dollar, it is strategy. It is sitting down in the conference room, just hashing out this guideline. Now, you have to be fast and you can't assume you're going to create the perfect plan out of this. So don't waste your time of like, oh, this is it. If this fails, we have this to work on, right? You always have a redundancy in your plans, especially for influencers, because you think, all right, I'm going to spend X, I'm going to find this particular influencer demo, I'm going to seed our products within that influencer, and I'm going to keep going from there. It doesn't work that way. So you need to always come back to, all right, if this doesn't work, then I'm going to move this route. And then you have to have these phases. The best way to go about this beforehand is creating milestones and objectives, impression share, how many influencers you're seeing, are we reaching that? Then we can impact growth by like pulling that lever. Now, I wouldn't ever say like, oh, it doesn't work, so let's just quit and give up. Definitely not. So
Yeah, right, yeah, and well, one thing that we see, I think often too, is like part of the plan is a lot of brands like pay these influencers like based on just follower count. And I don't know, like how should people like actually evaluate creators if followers aren't the best like metric?
yeah, there's a great book. We'll probably just link it in the description, but it's like, instead of having one influencers at 100,000 followers, I'd rather have 100 influencers at 1,000 followers. And what that means is like that, like influencer with 1,000 followers has a huge impact on their following, right? Way more work for you. You just kind of want to get the banger and leave. Um, you're not always going to be able to do that. And so it depends on your size. If you're a startup brand, and we love working with like passionate small to medium sized startup brands, because what they have is they could have that flexibility and willing to put the work into to grind, but you have to start with smaller influencers unless you're really backed. But it just depends. It really just depends on who you are, what that means. If followers are limited to you, then you need to maximize that impression share. But also note that with those with smaller follower counts but are consistent, usually have a better engagement rate, right?
Yeah.
You send more traffic to your listings, your conversion rate usually decreases, right? Less traffic you have, the more conversion rate you are. It's just kind of the natural thing of impressions overall.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about like usage rights. I think those get overlooked like all the time, and this is probably like another part of the plan that brands can like look into. And so, why are usage rights sometimes more valuable than the actual like organic reach from the creator?
Great question. I think usage rates, we have to be very careful because we work with brands. I have friends who are influencers who work with brands, right? And I'm very much on like, as long as you can be as mutual and upfront as possible. But as some of my friends who have like managers, and their managers are just cutthroat and like hard, and you can only grow so far being nice, right? Well, everybody's kind of out for themselves. But usage rights at the end of the day just mean you give them your product. Well, can I use it indefinitely? Can I use it across any platforms? The most important part is like, if you have somebody post something organically and it blows up, well, why wouldn't you want to use that across your media, your paid media pages, and across other channels and platforms, across some of your marketing material? Depending on what kind of like organic post that is. Like, you obviously want to utilize something that works, but you have to have a mutual agreement with the influencer, with the content creator, and they too with you, the brand. And so there's a level of like, okay, I found something that really blew up, but now I can't use it. No, you have to have that like mutual ground in between, and pay them for their work if you need to. If they don't care, then great, you just saved a bunch of money. So yeah.
Yeah. Like for smaller brands as well, since some of the times they don't have huge budgets, do you like David, do you typically lead towards like flat fees, commissions, or some other kind of like hybrid structure?
Definitely hybrid for the most part. Like on TikTok, we usually do both of the campaign types. So we'll do just a standard open campaign that's just fixed. Commission rate potentially is just like there as well, but it's like anybody can join it. Approval for products, and then for some of like the higher ends, like I'm kind of trying to go after you. I might do something a little bit hybrid. So it just depends on the margins, depends on the influencer, depends on the campaign that you're running. So there's so many things in there. Intention is like key, but don't get stuck in the weeds with it, right? Like, kind of outline it, what is going to work, test it, fails, move on, test it again, fail fast, win fast, right? So yeah, that's what you have to do when it comes down to influencers, and influencers are moving fast. So it's hard to keep up sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, like what's your process with like margins? Like how do you accidentally or like what's your process for determining a commission rate without like, yeah, accidentally destroying the margins?
Yeah. So think about like your lifetime value of a customer. Most of the time, what you're paying is your CAC. We kind of talked about it this morning in our meeting, or customer acquisition cost. When somebody buys through an influencer, usually they pay for that one-time purchase. If you're set up with subscriptions or a really good LTV, what happens is you need to incorporate that into your blended cost of acquisition from that influencer. I'm giving the influencer 20%. I'm giving a discount of 10%. I'm already down 30% off that initial purchase, right? And that's not including like Amazon referral fee or TikTok fee or any of the other things. So you might just be zero profit the first time, but you give that customer such a great experience that they purchase the next time directly through you, through your subscription. Your subscription's 10% off. So now ongoing, you're just 10% off. They purchase on average 2 to 3 more orders from you. Now that one-time acquisition of that customer is huge for you, right? Like, that's a massive piece. So when you're kind of blending in these margins, try not to think of it of like, oh, I'm not making any money off that first purchase. Well, then your objective is, I need to make sure that they purchase 2, 3, 4 times afterwards, right? Now that you have that customer. And that's why Amazon data is like close to their heart. You're never going to get that customer data because they know that is so impactful and they're not going to share it, right? So when I'm blending in the margins, I have to kind of see 3, 4 purchases in advance, which is 4, 5, 6 months in advance in some points, right? And blend that customer data together. And so there's so many tools out there. There's smarter people than I that can create that value and then understand how to grow that through email, SMS, social media marketing, like pull them into the fold and grow that brand. And influencers are a great way because they're not just producing sales content, they're producing educational content. They're producing, interesting, funny content, comedic content, all sorts of content that you want to follow. And yeah, and so they're selling you, but only because you like what you're watching. So yeah, that's kind of how I think through margins a little bit. There's a lot. We probably should be sitting down like in a huge group and doing this. So yeah, that'd be an interesting one to get more in depth in for sure.
No, yeah, that was amazing. Thank you so much for that. To sort of just wrap everything together and close this episode off, let's say, like, hey, if someone came to you, David, and was like, I want to launch an affiliate program, like, what would they do? But like, also give your tips and tricks. And maybe this is how, yeah, again, we can close this off. But like, to you, how do you create that program, but actually make it like healthy and work?
Yeah, right now, if I were to like somebody come up to me, it's like, okay, where are you going to host the affiliate program? How are you going to do all these things? Like, let's say you just host it for your website. You got to have a third party tool. You need to manage through that third party tool. You need to manage the influencers directly on that tool, meaning DMs, emails, etc. I would immediately just say, scrap that, go to TikTok. You need to be on TikTok if you can. Why? Is because then you're going to get the most assistance out of an influencer program through one platform. They manage the shipping. They manage you have all of the data. Like everything you need is in that platform. Now, there's a lot of other things that could be helpful for you outside of that, which would be great. But they come to me and they say, all right, well, how much product do you have? What's the overall market that we're trying to target? How much of that market do we need? How much of that impression share can we obtain? How much traffic can we drive to all your sales channel through that and reverse engineer it and say, how much product do we need to seed, build out your economics of that particular campaign, and then implement. Like most people will just get stuck halfway through the planning stages, but then implement. And then when you implement, you're consistent, you're following up, you're always seeding the product, you're always measuring against that, you're tracking traffic across all your paid channels. You really want this to grow, you need to just dial down and go make this work because it can. I've seen it happen. And once you see it happen at least 90 days in, you like if you give up a month or even 2 months in, you haven't made it to the end because you won't start seeing that come to fruition until you're 3 months down the road. And then you're going to be thinking, well, how do I get this to double? How do I give away double my products to influencers so that I could see this consistently grow? Because now you're able to track that LTV, you're able to track the economics over time. And that's where people really succeed. So yeah,
No,
that's what I would suggest.
thank you so much for that, David. That is the biggest takeaway from this episode for sure. So I appreciate that. But yeah, similar to what David was saying, like here at Anata, we strongly believe that creators and affiliates can absolutely be one of the biggest acquisition channels available today. But of course, they have to be managed in a way it's like a performance channel. So please, yeah, rewatch this. There's going to be some great clips that we're going to be posting on all of our social media channels. But that's it for today's episode. Thank you, David, for jumping on with me. And we will catch you guys on the next one.